On WNIN Lawmakers this week, our guest is Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield. We'll also get an update from the Indiana General Assembly. That's coming up next on WNIN. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Our guest this week is Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield. Before we begin our conversation, let's check in with Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith. He has a report on this week at the State House.
Among changes made to a controversial school curriculum measure, the bill no longer requires that teachers post classroom materials online before an annual deadline, or that schools create parent-led curriculum committees. A Senate committee also scaled back provisions limiting the promotion of divisive concepts and eliminated a way for parents to file lawsuits against schools over violations of the bill. House Republicans included a variety of tax cuts in their bill that would eventually cost the state more than $1 billion a year in revenue, and Senate Republicans took out every one of them. Senate leadership is wary of tax cuts this year, citing uncertain economic conditions. And changes made to the House GOP's COVID-19 vaccine mandate bill mean private companies will not be greatly restricted from enforcing such mandates. The bill now essentially preserves the status quo, requiring businesses to honor religious exemptions by following federal law. It also allows companies to require COVID testing up to 2 times per week and would let them charge their employees for the cost. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
Joining us now is Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield. He represents District 77 in Evansville. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Good to see you again. Well, let's get right to it. Positive COVID cases have been trending downward lately in the region. Several school districts, including Vanderburgh, Warwick, and Henderson on the other side of the river, have decided to make masks optional. The governor of Indiana also removed contact tracing and quarantine requirements for schools. Now, almost all of Southwest Indiana is still in the red category, according to the state. So what are your thoughts on all of these moves seeming to, basically loosen the requirements as we move through the pandemic?
You know, the Kentucky Democrat governor, the Indiana Republican Governor Holcomb, have both held off challenges from folks in their own party, other parties, and said, no, we're going to stay the course, we're going to continue to follow the science. And I really commend the Governor Holcomb in aligning himself with the Biden administration to say, we can come out of this, but we have to do the right things, we have to follow the science. And I believe that's what the governor has tried to do, despite Republican efforts in the House to overturn some of his actions. But what we're learning is that the Biden plan, the Rescue Act, getting folks free tests, 4 tests sent to your home for free from the federal government, and then Governor Holcomb really complementing those policies, it's working. In a bipartisan way, it's working. And so we need to stay the course, we need to continue to be vigilant. But if you are vaccinated, we know you're less likely to end up in the hospital, less likely to be seriously ill or to die. And so we need to continue to stay the course, be vigilant. But what we're learning is that the folks that were willing to follow the science are helping us trend those numbers downward and move on to normal life. And I think we're getting there.
So you're okay with some of these mask requirements being lifted?
Yeah, I think in areas where we're following the science and we are, and look, we're learning more about this, and some of the policies have changed, and I'm the first to say some of the CDC stuff has been confusing, but those of us who are trying to do what's best and have been vaccinated and are wearing a mask when appropriate, we're seeing in those areas the numbers come down, which means that we have to wear the mask less often. We have to be, we have to remain vigilant, but we're seeing progress. And so, yeah, I think that I've been so grateful, quite frankly, that Governor Holcomb has paired with the Biden administration to say we're going to follow the science, do the right things, and drive those numbers down.
All right. Well, speaking of masks in schools, let's talk about education, because there are quite a few education bills in the General Assembly. House Bill 1134. It would require teachers to post lessons on a website for parental review. It had a hearing in a Senate committee this past week. A lot of local teachers went up to Indy to speak out against it. It was amended in committee to remove many of the expressed concerns. So how do you think it will fare in the Senate, and will the House accept the changes that are being made there?
You know, several years ago I proposed a bill that required a floor that we had to pay every teacher at least $50,000 a year or more. Mm-hmm. And I heard from a lot of teachers, but I got to tell you, in my time as a legislator, it's tenfold the amount of teachers I've heard from concerned about 1134. I bring that up because they're more concerned about this bill and the damage it does to their students than their own pay. And I think it's so indicative of our teachers to be focused on a bill 1134 that it certainly was pared down by the Senate. I'm supportive of those changes. But what's left of it is really just a messaging bill that the Republicans feel some need to pass. And I hope that we'll just scrap it. And it was a solution in search of a problem. And we know that teachers are going in every day preparing lessons plans based on the evidence. And this bill really was an effort to change history or to not teach history in the way that we understand it. And so I hope that we will not pass 1134. What's left of it, it's now just a signal bill, I think, to the hard right. And we need to abandon those efforts and continue to allow teachers to do what they do best, which is to teach, and we need to support those efforts in this state.
Speaking of teachers, we've talked about it before, of course, a teacher shortage in Indiana. What do you think should or could be done to help get more teachers in the classroom here in Indiana?
You know, I think that pay and support and providing resources and classroom materials, all those things are good. We need to continue to encourage young people to go into teaching. We know that we lose teachers more often than not in the first 5 years of their profession. And we need to support school environments that are pro-teacher. But I got to tell you, bills like 1134, bills that some of the other bills that are moving through this particular General Assembly are not helpful. And we're hearing from teachers all over the state saying, I will leave my job, or you're forcing me out of this profession, or I'll take an early retirement if you do these things because I can't be the teacher that I need to be for these students.
And speaking of helping the classroom, I know you've long been a proponent of paying for the textbooks for K through 12 students. One question I believe I failed to ask you last time when we talked about that, how much would it cost the state to, say, provide textbooks K through 12?
It actually has a rather low score. It's several $1 million, but I got to tell you, that number reduces every single year. And we're one of now only 6 states. When I started this effort, we were one of 7 states. We're now one of 6 states that still sue parents when they get behind on textbook fees. These are needed materials in the classroom, but more and more they're going to tablets, and so that number drops every single year. But I think it's important we join the rest of the country and we not make it a criteria that not only do you have to have the book, but darn it, kid, your family has to be able to afford it. And I just think it's a shame. It's one more way to help Hoosier families.
Can the state afford to do that? I mean, again, how many millions would it require?
Yeah, and I think it's an important question. So we have a $1 billion surplus where we have so much money in the bank that we are mandated by law to give a tax credit back to Hoosiers this year. Each one of them will receive somewhere in the neighborhood of $136 to $196, I think. And so there's plenty of money. The state actually has never been so flush with cash. But the score was up near, I think, $9 million. And I think that it's a worthy investment. You got to remember who's paying those costs. Mm-hmm. It's parents who are trying to get their kids to school and go to work and put food on the table. And so it's just one less bill for middle income and low income families in the state that are struggling to pay the bills already.
Yeah. You mentioned House Bill 1002. That is the one that would give taxpayers a refund because the state has a surplus.
That's right.
It would also lower taxes that businesses pay on equipment. Now, the Evansville City Council just last week voted in favor of a resolution opposing that bill. They fear that it could reduce revenue for cities, counties, schools. Now you voted in favor of it. It's now moved to the Senate. Why did you support it?
I supported it because I felt it was necessary to move forward. I was hearing from my Senate counterparts that it was not going to look in the same way after the Senate got done with it. In fact, it's not going to look in the same way when it comes back to the House. Many of those revenue reducers for the cities have been taken out. We'll continue to work on this bill. I supported it because I know that Indiana businesses have also been part of the engine that got us through the pandemic, and we need to help them in every way that we can. And there were two parts to that bill. One were the tax cuts for businesses. The other one was the refund, and that's important too. It's not a lot of money, but and it's frankly it's mandated by law. But I thought it was important to keep that bill moving so that we can figure out where we can cut, if we can cut. And the Senate is reviewing that now. We'll get it back and take a look at it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see how that moves along. Now, this past week, another one of these controversial education bills. It's a bill that would ban transgender girls from competing in girls' school sports. It passed a committee and is headed to the full Senate now. What are your thoughts on the version of this bill in Indiana? We've seen similar things across the country.
Sure. You know, my thoughts on it were, and I opposed it primarily for this reason. One, every student in the state of Indiana needs to feel like school and the extracurricular activities that come with school for middle school and high school students are home. And that I didn't feel it necessary that we write into law that we're going to take over that process when every school system in the state has a process to deal with these. They have been dealing with these situations, and I think appropriately. Each one of them have a system set up. But more than that, guess what? Of all the systems set up and ready to handle these, there's only been one occurrence where it was even necessary for the local school board to get involved. It's my opinion that the system set up was the correct system in place. The local school systems can handle these each individually. And, you know, what's so fascinating about this particular General Assembly, the people I'm served with, is that we serve with a lot of big government Republicans that believe that government needs to be put into every facet of local life. And I just don't believe that, and I thought that the bill went too far.
Well, let's move on to some health issues. You co-authored House Bill 1255, known as Health Matters. It amends the definition of practitioner. It passed both the Indiana House and Senate unanimously. Can you explain, obviously it had full support, can you explain the purpose of the bill?
Sure. You know, this bill is just one small step to ensure that we are providing support around health practitioners, help doctors and folks in the medical field to ensure that we are creating a pathway to get there and that we have them stay in the state and continue to practice in the state. And very pleased that it got unanimous support in the House.
Yeah. Of course, we mentioned teacher shortages. We've also seen a lot of nursing shortages and other healthcare workers. Both the House and Senate overwhelmingly passed similar bills that were loosening some nursing school requirements to help ease the healthcare worker shortage. What are some of the changes in those bills, and do you have any concerns about maybe the quality of the students' education in that field?
I was very concerned about it and asked several questions about it in committee, talked to a lot of folks here locally, both in the nursing profession and out at USI. Of course, I'm married to a nurse who part of her job is hiring other nurses and making sure that they're fully staffed. And so I'm acutely aware of the struggles hospitals have had to fully staff their nurses in all their positions. And this is just one, I think, small step to help the nursing profession continue to get nurses into our hospitals. And we've got two major ones here in Evansville that are looking for nurses all the time. I do believe, as it passed the House, that we had it at 0% of the faculty needed at a university or college to be full-time. I thought that was too low. I said so at the time. I worked with the author. The Senate passed a version that required it to be at least 25%. Current law is 50. The House passed it as 0% full-time faculty, meaning that you could hire adjuncts to teach these courses.
Right.
And the Senate, at my urging, along with some of my colleagues, went with 25% requirement that colleges employ 25% of their faculty to be full-time. I think that's important. I am concerned about it, but I know that our shortage is hurting our hospitals and hurting our healthcare system and the ability to get in and be treated.
Right, right. Let's get into some pocketbook issues here, if we could. Citizens are concerned about the rising cost of utilities, gas, gasoline, and both natural gas. How can the state help relieve some of those concerns?
You know, it's a difficult problem, and the state absolutely can lean on the IURC and create policy that encourages these companies to reduce cost. A couple of things I think are happening, and I got to tell you, we had a town hall last Saturday, and that week I met with Centerpoint twice to continue to encourage them to lower cost and to find ways to cut costs. But I think there are two things sort of going on locally and around the state. We are transitioning from primarily a coal-based energy market in the state to natural gas and renewable energy. And while natural gas and renewable energy is cheaper per kilowatt than coal-based energy is, it requires a transition that's very costly. We're making investments in the infrastructure to deliver that energy. And that's where a lot of these charges are coming in. I was looking at my bill this week for me personally at home, and I got to tell you, my gas charge was the same amount as my distribution charge. But that distribution charge is what our investments in the future and in distributing natural gas and renewable energy, that's what that's going towards. So we're going to have to continue to work on it. The state can absolutely do some things, but I do believe that we're just at a point where our investments have not caught up yet with the ability to trim or stabilize our energy costs. I believe that day is coming, certainly not fast enough, and families are struggling every day, and energy costs are too high.
You mentioned you talked to Centerpoint Energy. Did you get any promises from them, or did you make any demands of them, I guess?
You know, I had productive meetings is what I would say. That, you know, perhaps as a younger legislator, I would go into a meeting like that and slam my hand down and say, look, this is it, we got it, this is the line, we need this to change today. But the reality is, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to come out of this overnight. But I was encouraged with Centerpoint's direction, but I implored them to continue to look at it and was hard on them in a lot of ways about the distribution increase, which is substantial. But I think that we are kind of in that transition where we're making investments at the same time energy prices are rising. And so what I would say about my meeting with Centerpoint is that it was productive.
Yeah. Well, let's get into another issue here. Ascension and Deaconess, the two big hospital health systems here in the Evansville area, have requested access to the Evansville-Vanderburgh County Central Dispatch System for use by hospital police forces, essentially a private police force. The promoted pros of this would be faster response times to incidents on a hospital campus. Some of the cause for concern is access to records and external oversight of an officer's conduct. Do you know much about this? Do you think this is an idea where the pros could outweigh the cons?
It's possible. I'll say it's not without my concerns. Before I was elected to the legislature, I was a prosecutor, and I had cases that battery on nurses, battery on doctors. But I got to tell you, it's mostly these nurses are in the line of fire when somebody comes in and loses their mind or is intoxicated or violent. And so I certainly think it's one of our institutions that needs protecting and needs to be a safe place for the people who work there and go there. You go to a hospital to get well, not to get hurt. And so I think that it could be a good idea. But let me say this, it needs oversight, significant oversight. And I think that there ought to be a connection to the local police force. I'm concerned about the idea primarily because I don't yet see the significant and appropriate oversight that I believe police forces need in general.
What kind of oversight do you think something like this would require?
Well, look, I think their police forces ought to be respondent to the Police Merit Commission. I think that the police force or another law enforcement body ought to have oversight of them. If the police need to be investigated here locally, the Indiana State Police step in and investigate them. Right. It's unclear if the same oversight would be provided to those hospital police forces. And so I'm concerned about it. I don't know that we have it totally worked out. I would like to see more work to be done on it before they are deputized, but it sounds like they're going to move forward with it. And my encouragement to them has been and will be oversight. We need training and to make sure that those officers are meeting every bit of the requirements that our local police officers are, if not more so, because they're oftentimes handling patients that are suffering from mental breakdowns or intoxication or other ailments that may need special interaction.
Yeah, right. Well, let's talk about something I know we've talked about before, but every bill that either would legalize or decriminalize marijuana in Indiana has been struck down. One of those I understand you co-authored. Why do you think this is an important issue, and do you think we'll ever see perhaps some legalization?
Yeah, let me say this. We've got a whole heck of a lot of state employees and government employees, teachers, police, firefighters, a lot of folks that work every day in our parks and our highways and roads that could all get a pay raise if we legalized and taxed marijuana. Now let me say this, I've been skeptical and worried about the prospect of that without road tests for intoxication and for making sure that we have the system set up for the state. Mm-hmm. But I've been in favor of legalization because, really for two reasons. One, every state around us has some form of legalization. So whether it's legal here or not, it's costing us more money at this point to regulate it and to control it coming in from our border states than it would just to legalize it and to set up a system in order to tax it and regulate it. And then second, this is a bipartisan effort at the suggestion of the governor. I really got involved when the governor said, okay, let's start setting up this system. And I worked with a representative, a Republican representative from the South Bend area, and we said, hey, let's come together, let's get the whole state involved, and let's set up a system for when the federal government changes the scheduling of marijuana. And so our bill said, when the federal government moves, we'll move, but we need an economy and a system set up to handle the change. This doesn't happen overnight, let's prepare for that. That bill's not going to move forward, and I think there's still too many, particularly in the Senate, who are skeptical of legalization. Mm-hmm. But I have gone full bore primarily because at this point it makes no sense to make marijuana or to keep marijuana illegal when Kentucky, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, every state around us has some form of legalization, and we've got it pouring in at every border.
Right, right. Well, we have a couple of minutes left here. Anything else you'd like to mention that perhaps we haven't touched on? Maybe some other bills you have in the works?
You know, I'm working every day on an increase in the workers' comp area. We've seen flat rates for workers' compensation for years now. We're wholly inadequate as far as our increases year over year. We passed a bill that increased the workers' comp rate. We passed it out of the House at 2%. I voted against it because 2% is not even a wash to the state at this point. It needs to be somewhere between 6 and 12% for at least 4 years. The Senate is considering that bill now and will bring it back to us, I think, with a higher number. But it'll be important for workers to get hurt on the job to ensure that they have the resources they need to get through those tough times.
I believe you mentioned last time we were together that the quality of life in Indiana, as you see it, is suffering, that we're not investing enough in our state. How would you suggest we invest in the state to make it more attractive to stop the brain drain, as they say,
Sure.
and also draw more folks in?
You know, one of the things that I talked to Mayor Winnicke about and city officials who I've been very supportive of in the investments he's made in this city are, you know, he was able to do those investments because the federal government, the Biden administration, put billions of dollars into the state, and it ended up with, I think, 90 some odd $million to the city. Those investments allow cities to grow. The state needs to have similar programs. We currently do it on a grant process, so you got to go up there and beg for a certain portion. It's not guaranteed for several years. The state, particularly if we were to legalize marijuana or to create other resources, should continue to fund our local municipalities so that they can make those investments in what's best for their cities, in their cities, with those decisions made by the people who live there. I think that our mayor has done a pretty good job of that over the time, but he's only been able to do it because the Biden administration passed the Rescue Act and the funding bill that provided real generational resources to these cities. Vitally important. I'd like to see the state set up a similar program that isn't grant-based. You don't have to come beg us for it. We're going to provide you the resources that you need to grow your city.
Perhaps you mentioned this a little bit, but in terms of possibly raising the minimum wage, this I know is an issue you've been in support of for quite a while. Are we ever going to see that come out of the Indiana General Assembly? I
don't think so. I think that the current makeup of the General Assembly, quite frankly, there's no other way to say it. My Republican colleagues are not currently in favor of raising the minimum wage. And I think that it should be raised, but I will tell you this, at this point, I don't think a raise in the minimum wage is a marker that we can track as meaningful, because the economy has picked up under the Biden administration to the point that businesses have had to increase their wages already. I picked up Happy Meals for my girls before I came here, and McDonald's is hiring at $13 to $15 an hour. You can go to Toyota, Berry Plastics, and to Kaiser, Alcoa in Warwick County and get jobs that double that kind of pay. And look, those are meaningful, impactful jobs locally for our families, for our local economy, but that have an impact on the economy worldwide. And so I'm not sure that the minimum wage is as big of a marker as it used to be, but I don't expect it to be increased in the Indiana General Assembly anytime soon. Thankfully, our businesses have picked up that slack.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks again for being with us this week. Next week, our scheduled guests are U.S. Senator Todd Young, Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer, and Indiana State Representative Wendy McNamara. I'm John Gibson of WNIN FM. Thanks for joining us for WNIN Lawmakers.